I'm excited to have a talk today from our esteemed Matthew Philippi. So today we'll learn a little bit about social media and orthopedics. So I expect lots of questions from the back row. The front row, you guys better know about this stuff. So. Okay. Thanks, Matt.
Yeah, thank you. Can you guys hear me? Okay, all right. Well, good morning, everyone. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Matt Philippi. I'm one of the fourth-year residents. Thank you all for the opportunity to give this Grand Rounds talk on social media and orthopedics. So, why give a talk on social media? My motivation came from my own skepticism and uncertainty about the value of social media. I think I have a negative bias about social media that stems in part from my time as a professional skier and the growing expectations about my social media presence. I landed my first ski sponsor a year before I started my Facebook account in 2006. It wasn't until 5 years later, in 2011, that I started an Instagram account at the behest of one of my team managers. And so I got into it. I started posting my stuff on Instagram and also on Twitter and Facebook and Vimeo and YouTube. More and more posts. And I also posted about my injuries. Shout out to Dr. Beals for those 3-5 screws. I still got them. And sometimes I got more likes than others. But mostly it was just my wife Emma trying to support me. And not much has changed. The new focus on social media within the ski industry was something that I participated in but always felt resistance to. Perhaps it was my limited ability to gain a following towards the end of my short-lived career that was frustrating. No matter, social media became ubiquitous within the ski industry, and your number of followers and impressions became a central component of every pro skier's resume. So, not surprisingly, I felt some relief entering the world of orthopedics, no longer worrying about my social media impact, especially in a professional sense. But then this happened. Residents and attendings from Utah started creating accounts and content. See Dr. Garcia, Daniel Jones, letting people know in Cedar City, come see me with orthopedic concerns. Here's our foot and ankle graduate. Some people were more involved than others, clearly. And some of our attendings, the sports team coming in strong, joints and spine. And this increased presence on social media is not unique to our team here in Utah. Globally, orthopedic surgeons are engaging on social media, discussing cases, teaching surgical techniques, sharing research, and even engaging with patients. And now I want to know what to do. Should I make an orthopedic account? What kind of content should I create? Is hashtag proximal junctional kyphosis trending right now on Twitter? I just don't know. And so I set out on this Grand Rounds talk to better understand the role of social media in orthopedics and what value we can bring to our practice, to our research, and to our education. And so here's a brief outline of what I'll cover in the rest of the talk. We'll start with a brief intro to social media and then discuss its role in potentially building a practice, in residency, in academic research, and also in orthopedic education. Social media is defined as a form of electronic communication through which users create online communities to share information, ideas, personal messages, and other content. The key point here is that it's not top-down dissemination of information. Everyone can contribute. Social media has a short history. In 1997, the first social media platform, 6 Degrees, came online. 2004, 2005 saw the start of Facebook and YouTube, which would become the two giants of social media. We can follow the timeline to newer applications like TikTok, Snapchat, and Instagram. This, of course, is a small sampling of just some of the most popular social media sites and platforms. The Pew Research Center has been tracking social media use for the last 20 years, and they continue to publish their findings. Their findings demonstrate a massive growth of social media over the last 20 years. In 2005, less than 5% of Americans use social media, as compared to over 70% of Americans today. When we talk about front row versus the back row, here you can see that young Americans use social media significantly more than older, young there. However, even older populations continue to increase their use and representation on social media platforms. YouTube is actually the most popular social media network, with Facebook in that same upper echelon. The growth and popularity of Instagram is demonstrated here as well. While social media use is widespread, this chart helps us understand what demographic groups are most well represented. The takeaway here is that the users are generally younger, they generally have higher income, and they generally have attained a higher level of education. Additionally, across platforms, the majority of social media users will log in daily, if not multiple times per day. And so, how are orthopedic patients engaging online? Well, one way we can study what patients are posting is through the use of Instagram hashtags, like hashtag hip arthroscopy, hip scope, hashtag labral repair. This is a study that did just that, and 1,850 Instagram posts were identified over a 1-year period using these hashtags. And the majority were positive, and they were primarily focused on the rehabilitation process. And there were 11% of posts about us, the surgeons. Here are 2 examples of post-operative Instagram posts from hip arthroscopy patients. At the top, you can see a more positive post about recovery, getting outside, being allowed to partially bear weight. And the bottom post is a more negative one, maybe how we classically view the post-operative hip scope patient. Or maybe it's a spine patient. I just can't tell. Here's a similar study that looked at Twitter and Instagram posts related to shoulder and elbow surgery using hashtag shoulder surgery, hashtag shoulder replacement, and rotator cuff repair. Similarly, we see positive posts about the recovery process and a notable focus on the surgical site itself for shoulder arthroplasty patients who have larger incisions as compared to arthroscopic portals seen in the last study. Here's a similar look at Instagram posts from knee and hip arthroplasty patients with a similar positive perspective and a similar focus on the rehabilitation process and also the incision sites. Here are some representative posts demonstrating patients' interest in their incision sites, their hardware, as well as their interest in imaging. And we see, of course, a similar pattern of social media engagement among patients with adolescent idiopathic scoliosis, with a focus on scars, the recovery process, and a lot of negative posts about being on the waiting list for surgery. The one thing I take away from all these posts is a reminder of the huge impact our work has on the lives of patients. So this is an interesting look at social media use in a population of upper extremity patients in rural Pennsylvania. They represent a population with a lower level of education compared to the national average, as well as less social media use than the national average. Among the 55% who were active on social media, many used it to research their condition as well as their surgeon. And I think the most important point here is that 38% of patients indicate that they would like some form of communication with their surgeon on social media, perhaps foreshadowing the ways in which we'll communicate with patients in years to come. And so what about the social media presence of surgeons? As we will see, orthopedic surgeons are certainly active and engaged across a range of social media platforms, and some with huge followings. Though, as a whole, social media use is limited. As a representative group, among the 1,200 members of POSNA, only 53% were active on social media. The majority using LinkedIn and ResearchGate. And now this paper is consistent across other subspecialties and highlights an opportunity for more engagement by surgeons. Among the POSDA members, the perception of various social media platforms is relatively neutral. On a scale of 0 to 5, a lot of 3s. The newest platform, TikTok, is viewed more negatively, and while more classic professional sites like LinkedIn and a private website are viewed more positively. When the POSDA members were asked if an orthopedic Instagram account should be used for sharing outcomes data, promotional information, educational information, and personal stories on orthopedic sites, or on orthopedic pages, generally outcomes and personal posts were viewed negatively. Promotional posts were viewed a little more positively, and there was some room for the notion of educational content on Instagram within this population of pediatric orthopedic surgeons. So if you're new to the ortho scene on Twitter, look no further than this article about the top 100 influencers based on a Twitter impact score. We can see that it's sports surgeons who dominate this space, and a majority of the top 100 are in private practice. Though a range of practice settings and subspecialties are represented in this group, and also there are some popular non-surgeons breaking into the top 100 influencer list as well. And so, to summarize my intro, we can see that social media is widely used, with only increasing representation across all demographics. It is certainly being used by our patients, and patients are interested in expanding use within healthcare. Orthopedic surgeons are active, but with room for increased use. So next I want to take a look at the role of social media in building a practice. So let's say me, Matt, your favorite resident. I start a practice, which, believe it or not, is going to happen in a couple short years. I can see it now. So, can I use social media to help me build a practice? Can it improve my health grade scores? Or can I get referrals? And how might I do that? Now, the reality is there's very limited literature to answer this question. One question that researchers have tried to answer is if social media presence can influence online ratings, like health grade scores. In this cross-sectional study of 116 randomly selected board-certified hand surgeons from 2022, they found that if a surgeon had 3 or more orthopedic social media accounts, that was correlated with a significantly higher health grade score. But when those surgeons had less than 3 accounts, their score was significantly lower. But the difference between groups was just a half star out of 5, so not a massive difference. A similar question was asked of spine surgeons in Florida. Health grades, vitals, and Google physician rating scores were pulled for the 215 NAS members who live in Florida in 2018. And what they found was that spine surgeons with a social media account had a significantly greater number of reviews across these sites. However, these reviews were no better and no worse than surgeons without a social media presence. Thus, there is very limited and equivocal evidence about the role of social media in enhancing your online ratings. However, practice-based social media accounts do not seem to have a deleterious effect for your rating. And so, while I could not find much literature that addressed this question, Dr. Chester Donnelly's story provides anecdotal evidence of the ability to build a practice with social media. Dr. Donnelly is a Rothman-trained spine surgeon who lives in Dallas, Texas. He's very active across multiple social media accounts. On Instagram and TikTok, he has over 20,000 followers. On YouTube, he has a short video that created over 1 million views. And on TikTok, he has one video that has over 3.7 million views about cervical disc replacements. Now, this is a huge number. With this online popularity, Dr. Donnelly has patients from across the country reaching out to him on social media directly about their spine issues, some of whom have flown to Dallas to have him do their surgery. And so I reached out to Dr. Donnelly, and I had the opportunity to spend half hour on the phone with him learning more about his path. He completed his residency training in Florida before going to Rothman and then heading home. And he started an anonymous orthopedic Instagram account during residency. Now, keeping it anonymous limited any issues with HIPAA and also kept his attendings from asking questions and wondering why he was wasting so much time on social media. One of his goals from the outset was to build a following and then to leverage that following to ultimately generate referrals once he started to practice. So he flipped the name of his Instagram account to his personal name, many years after he started. And now he never thought he would get legitimate patients, but over the last year, some 8 years into his work on social media, he's having patients reach out to him directly and fly into Dallas, like I had said. Now he assures me that these are normal patients, even good patients, which was somewhat surprising to him. So now if he has a quiet week or two in clinic, he will go to his social media lab, which is his garage with a green screen, and he will start making content. He thinks he spends roughly 5 hours a week generating this content, and once his practice is more established, he plans to stop doing this. This is purely a way for him to start his relatively young spine practice. So when considering the role of social media in your practice, educational social media content can be directed towards patients to help them better understand their pathologies and their treatment strategies and improving their experience and possibly their outcomes. Not surprisingly, however, there is a lot of really poor information on the internet out there. In 2012, the quality, accuracy, and readability of online content related to distal radius fractures was studied. And more technical, using the search term distal radius fracture, not surprisingly yielded a higher quality and more accurate content than searching for a broken wrist. The findings of the study may have been predictable, but it is an important concept captured here is that there's a lot of bad information out there as well as on the social media. And so the question is, what is our role as experts? How are we going to decide how to interface with that poor information? Do we have a role to create higher quality information and to engage in that realm? The variable quality of online content was redemonstrated in this study out of the Steadman-Philippon group in Vail. In 2015, the quality of content related to femoral acetabular impingement was studied, and among the 52 videos identified on the first 3 pages of YouTube, the quality was found to be generally quite poor, with just 4 videos entering their realm for high quality information. The limited quality of online resources is important because an informed patient is generally a much better patient and can have appropriate expectations about their pathology, surgery, and recovery. While this study is from the general surgery literature, it demonstrates just that. Patients undergoing hernia repair surgery were either instructed to read 3 pre-selected online resources about their surgery, while the control group was not instructed to read anything. Among the group that had read up on their surgery, a significantly higher percentage were satisfied with their surgery and not surprisingly had their expectations met. In the control group, you can see a much lower degree of very good, excellent postoperative satisfaction scores, and only 30% had their expectations met. So when starting a practice, one of the things you can do if you don't know how to generate content for your social media platform is think about, how can I educate my patient? What information can they have that's going to help out their experience? And so to summarize this section, I think social media use in building a practice has incredibly limited evidence. However, Dr. Donnelly's TikTok spine surgery story is fairly convincing evidence that social media can get patients into your clinic if that's what you want or need. My sense is that Dr. Donnelly's model will be replicated aggressively, especially in the private practice setting in the years to come. In fact, just yesterday I was fed this advertisement on Instagram from this company, Moxie, whose purpose is to help surgeons market, PR, and create social media content for their pages. And you can see that this is a video of their video crew going into the OR with some spine surgeons, filming their story, and really with the goal of helping these surgeons generate content. So now there's even people trying to make money off this idea and this momentum in our world. I think lastly, when we think about social media and building a practice, the importance of educating patients leading to higher satisfaction, I think this is a nice idea of a way to positively impact your patient's life and be involved on social media. So now moving on to the role of social media in orthopedic residency. Residency programs increase their presence on social media in a massive way in the wake of COVID-19, accelerating a growth that already existed. Without away rotations and without in-person interviews, social media, and especially Instagram, offered a window into each program. In response to this shift, some new research in this arena, JBJ has put together an AOA Critical Issues in Education series to focus on this. And here's a cross-sectional study with some impressive numbers. In May of 2019, there were only 76 social media accounts related to orthopedic surgery residencies, and just a year and a half later, we see a 300% increase to 239 accounts. And now a majority of those are on Instagram. And the thought is that Instagram is an incredibly visual platform, and orthopedic surgeons are incredibly visual people. Here, applicants from the 2021 application cycle at Oklahoma State University were surveyed regarding their perceptions, the Oklahoma State University Orthopedic Residency Program, that is. They were surveyed about their perceptions of social media use with residency programs, and more than half of applicants found that the social media posts from residency programs were really helpful, and nearly 80% of applicants expect social media accounts from residency programs. Applicants noted their interest in meet the resident or meet the attending posts, and also in life outside of residency, a theme that we'll see. And here's yet another cross-sectional study looking at the significant increase in orthopedic accounts across residency programs. As a whole, the residency programs could be doing a better job drawing attention to these accounts. Some other interesting findings is that as a whole, only 50% of residency pages linked their social media accounts from their website. So as a whole, we could improve that. Our website does not have a link to our social media account. One interesting finding from this cross-sectional study was that there was a higher residency doximity score correlated with those programs with Instagram accounts. When considering what residency social media accounts should post, it is important to remember what all attendings already know about us residents. We are especially lazy, we are soft, and we really just want a good quality of life. But seriously, here's a list of 37 factors that applicants were asked to rank. And now this is purposely not readable. There's 37 things here that the residents ranked. But if you zoom in at the top two factors that applicants consider when ranking programs is perceived happiness of quality of life of current residents, as well as resident camaraderie. So the applicants have spoken, and they want to know if life is good, and they want to hear about it on Instagram. And so now we have evidence that participating in outdoor activities and filming and making videos may in fact help us recruit residents. And so here's a look at the lifestyle section of our video that Luke Meyer and I created to share with our incoming applicants, just to show that we are on the cutting edge of social media orthopedic technology. But either way, it was interesting reading the literature and really feeling like this kind of content is exactly what resident applicants want to hear about. So you can see this, of course, on my Vimeo channel, as well as this is actually linked on the residency website as well. So moving on. And so to summarize, social media and its role in orthopedic residency, we've seen rapid growth. I think there's some concerns about quality of the content. I think we have a clear ability to influence the applicant, and there is a desire for more content coming from applicants. So next I want to talk about the role of social media in the academic researcher. The impact of one's research is classically quantified by the number of citations. There are multiple scores across which researchers attempt to quantify the impact of their research, like the Hirsch Index, for example. But one of the issues with citations is that they can take years to accumulate. Therefore, it can be difficult to quantify the impact of one's research in the immediate time frame after it's published. And so the use of social media to share research and the number of shares and comments can provide a real-time look at the impact of one's research. And so here, the purpose of this study was to compare conventional citations to online mentions of research. And they identified almost 1,700 randomized controlled trials within the musculoskeletal literature published between 11 and 14, with 13,000 citations and 15,000 online mentions. When comparing the frequency of citations with the frequency of online mentions, we see similar trends with a median of 3 citations and a median of 2 posts. This is the part that I think is a little more interesting. The total number of citations correlated with the number of online mentions, but online mentions accumulated more rapidly. Here on the left in the green, you can see online mentions, which reach 80% of their total at about 2 years out from the initial post, whereas citations continue to grow and reach that same 80% mark at closer to 4 years. If you sum those two factors, what you develop is this. If you sum the cumulative proportions here, what you end up is a linear relationship, which is interesting and may provide evidence for some sort of metric system that combines both online as well as classic citations to measure the impact of your research over time. In order to better quantify the online impact of research, altmetric attention scores were developed. This is a proprietary scoring system, and it's something I really hadn't heard about prior to preparing for this talk. These altmetric attention scores measure the online impact by measuring mentions across multiple platforms, and they have different weighting systems, generating a score in the end. Here we can see a couple more examples of how altmetric scores are used and some of the features of this proprietary software. Here you can see Twitter posts about some article, and then you could also click through on other social media platforms and understand where they're getting shared. And interestingly, you can see a demographic breakdown of the geographic representation of your posts and where they're coming from, and where people are reading and sharing your literature in a real-time fashion. The altmetric score has been studied within orthopedic literature, and the question has been asked, what is its ability to predict citations? A total of 496 articles were published in this group of popular orthopedic journals, and what they found was a greater altmetric score was associated with a greater citation rate. Additionally, they found that articles in sports journals and publications from North America were independently associated with increased altmetric scores. So there are certainly some researchers highly against altmetric scores. So this is an editorial published in the forest ecology literature, and it captures what is an obvious concern about the value of a bunch of tweets when measuring the merit of someone's research. So I'll just read it. Why altmetric scores should never be used to measure the merit of scientific publications, or how to tweet your way to honor and glory, which I just loved. And so this Swedish professor looked at altmetric scores of the first 100 papers published in Ecology in 2015, and he compared scores of publications that were tweeted by those authors versus scores that were authors who hadn't tweeted their citations. And what he found was that if you tweeted your paper, you were going to have a significantly higher altmetric score versus if you didn't promote your own research on Twitter. So this is obviously a concerning finding within this ecology literature, and you can imagine it translates elsewhere. To further call into question the value of altmetric scores and any research spread widely on Facebook and Twitter, he compared altmetric scores from publications of popular climate change denialists and compared those to the first 100 papers published in Ecology in 2015. And what he found was that these papers that are widely shared on social media are sort of not surprisingly going to be very popular and have this elevated altmetric score compared to really more high quality research. So caution when taking into consideration some of these scores. So infographics is something else I want to talk about here. Despite disagreement about and lack of complete understanding about the value of altmetric scores and the value of social media views, researchers and other activities have actively started sharing their work on social media, and the ability to quickly and efficiently convey information about one's research is limited with a traditional abstract, and so there's been a transition towards visual abstracts or infographics. And so here we can see a press release from the editor-in-chief of JBJS announcing the move to infographics and video summaries. Now each issue has an infographic button providing a 2-minute easy-to-digest overview, and the authors cite the crunch time of a busy practice and the goal of really trying to widely disseminate one's research. And additionally, JBJS actively encourages authors to share their content on social media. And so here is an example of an infographic about suture buttons versus screws for syndesmotic fixation. And I'll go back to it in a second because here's an editorial from the Bone and Joint Journal talking about how to create an infographic, what to focus on. And they talk about considering your target audience, trying to grab the reader's attention, using arrows and pictures much more than words, and keeping it consistent with colors as well as fonts. And so going back to here, we can see a very consistent sort of color theme, easy to follow, picture-based story about suture buttons and screws and our outcomes. So in order to better understand the value of these infographics, a residency program in Ireland compared retention of article details via use of infographics or abstracts over the course of 10 weeks of a journal club. Now, either a written abstract or an infographic was up on the big screen like this during a journal club, during a 1-hour journal club. And then multiple choice questions were distributed to the residents over the subsequent weeks, and over 1,000 questions were answered by residents. And essentially, what they found was that there was a significantly higher score on the multiple choice questions, a higher percentage of correct scores with the infographics up on the screen versus just text abstracts. And then the vast majority of residents really preferred these infographics, maybe not surprisingly. So here's a study from the general surgery literature which compares tweets that included only the article title versus the article title as well as an infographic or a visual abstract. And the results are really quite impressive. If you tweet your visual abstract instead of just the title, we have 7.7-fold increase in number of impressions on Twitter, an 8-fold increase in the number of retweets, but I think this is the most important fact here, is that there's a nearly 3-fold increase of article views and hopefully article reads by including an infographic instead of just tweeting the name of an article. So we're seeing a real change and a real endpoint here of actually reading the article. And here I share the study design of that article, not so much to discuss the design in great detail, but I thought it was clever that this paper, all about visual abstracts, would create a great visual way to convey their study design here. And you can see that the tweets with the title only then had a 4-week washout period, and then they were retweeted with the title and visual abstract, and then we found some outcomes. And then we had another pathway here. And this is just a really easy way to understand the study almost instantaneously. So I thought that this was a really nice example of that. So all of this is really good news for those of us orthopedic surgeons who are visual learners and who really can't read good and want to learn to do other stuff good too. So when talking about social media and academic research, I think tweets certainly correlate with citations. Citations accumulate more slowly, and all metric scores exist, but they are controversial, and infographics, I think, are a nice way to convey information and something to consider utilizing as we move forward. So now I want to move to the role of social media and the orthopedic educator. There is a huge opportunity for orthopedic education on social media. First, I want to highlight some research from our own department, which shows what educational resources are being used by orthopedic residents in training. Highlighted in red are examples of social media sites that were included in this study. ViewMedi, which many of us know, that's a platform where we are uploading videos, surgeons are uploading videos, I've uploaded videos, and we're sharing all that information. That's a social media site, same as YouTube. And then also podcasts and blogs are also considered social media platforms. Again, the idea that users are creating the content and creating the network. I included other here because perhaps this was a reference to social media in a more classic sense like Facebook or Instagram. So what I want to showcase next are examples of online case discussions which represent a new era of orthopedic learning available on social media. So I want to start with Dr. Chip Rout's Twitter feed. I thought Kellen would get a kick out of that. So this is a great example of how orthopedic educators can engage with medical students, residents, fellows, and attendings across the world. Chip Rout's Twitter feed includes detailed case discussions offering his own guidance and insights. And so here is an example. We can see presenting films of an associated both column fracture with some nuance and commenting on the pelvic binder, which is actually displacing the fracture itself. Next, we move on to advanced imaging with multiple views, and again, Dr. Rout's personal thoughts on each aspect of the workup, and then a detailed look at the articular fragment of the superior articular dome, followed by a brief description of the surgery itself with post-op films and, if available, post-operative CT scans as well. As well, you can see he talks about the rehabilitation process. So it really takes you on a nice journey through this case with the opportunity to ask questions along the way and interface. And here we can see just that. At the end of the post, Dr. Seb Heaven, a guy from up in Ontario, was then able to reach out directly to Dr. Rout and ask a question about binders, which Dr. Rout replies to, followed by another trauma surgeon from Germany chiming in. So I think the opportunity to ask a legend in orthopedics a question with such ease is something that should not be understated. Chip Rout joined Twitter back in 2017. So 5 years ago, you might need to go to an AO course or be one of his fellows or residents to learn from him. But now, in theory, all you need is an internet connection. Next, I want to focus on at orthopedic trauma, also known as Dr. Michael Githens, who is a Harborview attending who was a co-fellow with our own Dr. Haller. His strategy and motivations are a lot different from that of Dr. Chester Donnelly. Dr. Githens is purely motivated by education. His goal is to educate medical students, residents, fellows, and also attendings on an international level. Now, every resident in this room follows him because his case presentations are well done, they're interesting, and there is great engagement from his followers in the comments section. I had the opportunity to interview Dr. Githens and ask him about his very popular Instagram account. Now, the way he started his social media life is how we all might expect. He had an account posting pictures of his family or surfing or friends or whatever. But one day, he's surfing the Instagram web, and he sees a picture of a pilon fracture, an ORIF of a pilon, that is unmistakably his. And he says, what the hell is going on? So he reaches out to this Instagram account, the guy who runs it, and says, what the hell are you doing posting my x-rays, and how did you get this? What is happening? So it turns out that this is one of the international visiting attendings who apparently visit Harborview a lot. And so this guy, during his short stay, it's not a traditional fellowship, but it's like a short stay at UW, had taken a ton of photos of all the x-rays that he had seen while he was there and had taken to posting it on Instagram. What Dr. Githens discovered in this process was that there was generally an exceptionally poor quality of discussion going on around all these x-rays that are being posted on Instagram. And what he also discovered is that there was an exceptionally high degree of engagement from international surgeons really trying to obtain a better education. And those surgeons had certainly a lot fewer resources than we have as trainees in the United States, with ample access to textbooks and attendings and whatnot. And so Dr. Githens' epiphany was that orthopedic education and discourse is really active on Instagram and other social media platforms, but it is overall terrible quality, and that he really had an opportunity to change this single-handedly. And so he started sharing his cases, and he has maintained a similar format throughout, starting with injury films and advanced imaging and clinical scenarios, just like we saw Chip Rout do. And then he offers some guided questions, and he does this through a range of training levels. He asks medical students questions, residents questions, fellows questions, and so different degrees of training can chime in with different levels of expertise. And he's followed this, to this day. So interestingly, his bosses at Harborview at some point tried to shut down his account due to fear of HIPAA violations and other medical legal concerns. And so for 6 months, he was off the gram, no posts. The account was taken down. And so during that time, at academic meetings, for example, other attendings would come up to him and say, what the hell happened, man? My residents are really upset. Like, we had a great time going over your cases. It provided great discussion. We don't always agree with what you're doing, but it creates awesome discussion, and you should really get back to work on this. And so eventually he came back online. And this was after getting approval from his bosses in the Harborview faculty. And of course, what is kind of ironic about all this is then a couple more years later, UW created their own orthopedic trauma account, really modeling his in a response to just how popular and how valuable this educational experience has been for people. And so, we talked about Dr. Chester Donnelly spending 5 hours in the Instagram lab creating content to get some patients. Dr. Githens, he says he spends about 45 minutes a week on this. He says that he's really clinically busy and so can't spend much more time on this. But what he does spend even more time is actually answering direct message questions from international orthopedic surgeons asking for help, asking for what you would do with this fracture, and what you would do with this fracture in a resource-limited setting, not with some of the implants that we have access to, but some of the implants that only they have access to in countries with fewer resources. And so, maybe not surprisingly, this guy immediately became my hero. His motivation on social media is purely to educate and to really try to improve the care of patients that he'll never see halfway across the globe. So I thought this was a really interesting story and juxtaposition to how you can use orthopedic social media. And so, to summarize the role of orthopedic education in social media, I think there's a great opportunity there. Case-based styles of Githens and Route are certainly very enjoyable and allow you to essentially attend a fracture conference at any point that you have your phone and an internet access. And I think perhaps the most meaningful ability for the surgeon is to educate people across the globe. So another thing I want to touch on is social media advocacy as we get towards the end of my talk here. One of the most powerful components of social media is its ability to propagate social movements. We've seen this, for example, with the hashtag #MeToo movement. I think that we probably don't appreciate how difficult it is to create a social movement without social media in this day and age. And so the hashtag #ILookLikeASurgeon movement was started by women surgeons back in 2015 in response to the ongoing marginalization of women, as well as racial minorities within medicine and especially surgery. This actually started as a hashtag #ILookLikeAnEngineer, which was a motivation from the engineering community to address the same ongoing sexist culture that existed within their realm. But nonetheless, this was adopted by some surgeons in 2015 and has become a huge social movement. It's maintained its momentum to this day and serves a reminder that there are still persistent gender and racial inequalities that exist. You can find thousands of photos of women surgeons with this hashtag, bringing awareness to the experience of women in the OR, which honestly brings an awareness that I didn't have, and I wouldn't have without this. An example of what I think the power of hashtag #LookLikeASurgeon has is recently one of our own residents presented her research at the Academy. And you know, what an honor and what an achievement to do that, only to be asked by someone there, oh, are you a scrub tech? What are you doing here? And so she shared that experience on Instagram with the hashtag #ILookLikeASurgeon, and that was subsequently shared by a number of co-residents, and that changed what was a hurtful comment based on what was likely an unconscious sexist bias, and it turned it into a message that will continue to strengthen and galvanize the movement. So I think this is a unique aspect of social media that needs to be considered. Hashtag PrideOrtho and @PrideOrtho is another example of this, and this is an example of social media advocacy within orthopedics, and this time with the goal of increasing LGBTQ presence within our field. And here we can see our own Dr. Pelt showing his support at a PrideOrtho event, which again I think just what an opportunity for a leader in our department and a leader in orthopedics to go out there and publicly support a movement and create an inviting community. So again, I think this is a really powerful aspect of social media. And so to conclude my talk, I want to go over a list of recommendations on starting a social media account as an orthopedic surgeon. Here is a JBJS review article that I think did a nice job of outlining some of these recommendations that I'll share and I'll modify a little bit. But I think defining your objective is key. Dr. Donnelly wants to build a practice, and I think all of us heading out there in a few short years will want to do the same thing. I think that's a very legitimate cause, and he's a good spine surgeon with great training, and so I think that this is a reasonable thing to do, and patients are getting reasonable care. Dr. Githens, his motivation is not to get patients. He's a trauma surgeon at Harborview. He's swimming in trauma, and so his goal is education. And so social media can be quite nebulous, and so I think having a clear goal, if you do choose to embark on this, it can be quite helpful. I think it also makes sense to only do this if it's enjoyable for you. I'm not convinced that the possible benefits of social media are so huge that everyone should engage and everyone needs an account. I think if you hate every minute of it, you certainly shouldn't get engaged. But if you can find some enjoyment, if you can find a niche that you like, I think there's a potential benefit for you. I think realistic goals are important. I think you can commit a small amount of time, given our busy schedule each week, and you can anticipate a small following to start. But over time, that following will grow. It took 8 years for Dr. Donnelly to really attract patients to his clinic, 8 years of work on social media to get there. It's really important that you observe HIPAA and patient privacy will influence what you can post. And this is a really important thought process here. The more unique and exciting the case that you want to share on social media is, the longer you probably have to wait to share it. And if a pathology or a treatment strategy is so unique, if the x-rays might really give away who that patient is to that patient, and that would mean that you would never actually be able to post that. So you need to consider that the more unique a problem is, the less likely you're going to be able to post it, or the more you have to consider delaying that post for years even. Boilerplate legal disclaimers may be of use, clarifying to patients that your Instagram account is not the same as a clinic visit. And then I think it's also really important that we link to high quality content or create your own. We've seen that overall the quality of information on social media can be quite limited. And so I think it is our job as surgeons to really engage in this space, create high quality content, and guide the industry and guide our patients. One last thing to look at is if you do move forward with social media within the UHealth system, there's a link to our social media guidelines right here, and it's easy to find to Google. And so here's a list of some references, and I want to thank you for your time and attention, and be happy to take some questions. Alex.
What did you learn about the HIPAA, more specifically? How do you keep that okay? If I have a personal account, I want to put patient's x-rays on there with no name. Do you wait a few months? Do you ask the patient? What are the rules?
Yeah, so the rules are unclear, essentially, and nebulous. And so, for example, we talked about Dr. Githens and his struggle basically getting his account shut down. And what he said was that, the rules were unclear, and he was saying, how can I share this same information on a case report or in a textbook chapter, but I can't share it on Instagram. And so he worked with his department and UW to clarify some of the rules and to make sense of it. Reading the UHealth rules, it's a little bit like follow HIPAA and don't be a jerk, is essentially the takeaway. And so I think there's a little bit of this is a new realm, and I think that if you post something and a patient gets pissed about it, then that's a problem. But if you're able to post content and not create a stir, then that's good. And so I think there's a little bit of us feeling it out as we go. But I think the short answer is people are still kind of figuring that out.
Alex, there is a case in this town about 10 or 12 years ago. The surgeon used to cover the Alta clinic, hell out this side of the Alta clinic, and there was a young gibber, or like one of the park rat kids, so he's famous online as well. Focus femur, this guy GoPro'd him nailing the femur, and in an effort to build his business. At that time it was Facebook, because that's what it was. And there was a complication, and that is no longer posting, that's now called evidence. So the E in email stands for evidence. Anything you put electronically is subsequently subpoenable.
The university has a formal consent form for social media stuff that you can access, and it has checkboxes that the patient will check themselves about what they want to share and what you're allowed to share. And this is a general rule of thumb. There's no identifying information that can go with whatever you use. So it's kind of treated the same as if they're consenting for using their stuff for research, but there is an actual form that the university has.
Dr. Peters.
Thank you. Here's a softball question for you. What do you say to the growing body of thought that social media may be ruining the fabric of adolescent growth?
Well, I agree with that thought. I've got a couple kids, and I think that there's a lot of pathology within social media. I think that you get online and you're comparing yourself to others, and you've got filters that make you look like a model, or it's like there's a whole bunch of garbage out there that I think is really troublesome to kids. I think I was talking to my wife about this just last night, and we're like, no social media until age 16, maybe. But it's like, I think that they're, for the developing brain and for kids, I think that I don't think it's a really healthy thing, and so I'm with you on that.
I didn't pick a side.
Okay. Well, my side is decidedly that this is I'm concerned a little bit. Yeah. Kellen.
Yeah, I was fortunate enough to be kept up to date on the Twitterverse last year. What is the role of Dr. Higgins or Dr. Peters to be on social media? I think we saw this with coronavirus. We saw this with the election, that some people get to decide what information is right, and some people get to decide what information is wrong. And there's certainly people on each side of those. And what are the role of the experts in the fields to be on these social medias now to control what information is out there? Because there's certainly stuff out there that is different than what people think is right but isn't wrong, and then there's stuff that's out there that is wrong.
Right. Yeah, no, I think that's the amount of information out there that's poor. And for example, I was looking at some post of, I think it was a 4-level cervical disc replacement case, and someone with collapsed discs, and it's just I really concerning for me in my training and my understanding of how you treat pathology, and that being promoted as some sort of win, some exciting new thing. And so, yeah, what role do we have? I think that, you can't... One thing Dr. Githin said was that, he'll comment on people's posts and offer differing opinions and say why he's concerned about a treatment strategy. But how much time does Dr. Higgins and does Dr. Peters want to spend doing that? Probably zero. Yeah, zero seconds. And so, yeah, what responsibility do they have? I would say, very limited responsibility, but I think it's an interesting space. Yeah, I think it's a tough question because I think it's an interesting space where there's some garbage information, and the more that we could provide helpful information would benefit our patients and create less issues for you in clinic. Someone comes into clinic and says, hey, I saw this, and why can't we do that? And you got to spend 20 minutes explaining why it's stupid. So yeah, I think it's a tough question, and I don't know what the answer is.
Hey Matt, just to follow on to that, so do you think, did you run into any other strategies that you think might legitimize the way we use social media further? Because I follow Dr. Giddens, I follow a couple of other ortho trauma people, and I feel like it's tremendously educational. Do you have the appropriate training to interpret what is good and bad information? I have gotten a ton out of it, but I've had run-ins with several attendings where I just can't help myself. I bring up something I saw on the internet, and they're like, what? Just where I saw it was a problem. It doesn't matter what I saw. And I think that we miss out if we just blow this off because of the platform, but I wonder how we could, if there are any other strategies that we could use as a field to legitimize this further, because I think it's like the pristine use of social media is the people who design social media initially wanted to use it before they realized they could make money. It's a great forum. It's well designed forum, but I don't know, people hate it.
Yeah, I think I love it, and I think that what I think is that this is a relatively new thing in I think this is a new phenomenon, and so I think that as we move on in our career, we'll be more comfortable with this venue for sharing information and discussing cases. I think that sort of answering the question maybe of how to police it, less of how to get information. I think that having hopefully there's a few motivated people like Dr. Githens within various subspecialties who can develop a following like his because they're high quality and respected. And that can be sort of the police, which is, these are good, they have a following. I think how do we try and educate ourselves and as educators guide more junior residents and sort through the crap. I think it's tough. Again, I think our culture, we're bringing social media with us, and it's gonna become much more normal for us. And we're gonna probably have an Instagram account when we're old and gray and think everything else is dumb. And yeah, but I'm not sure how we police it, and I guess we'll see. But yeah, I don't have a good answer to your question either.